Greetings and welcome to another edition of Radical Grace Radio.
I'm Pastor Gary Held.
My name's Matthew Pancake, and this is episode 811. And it's an interesting episode because I think it is. There's going to be stuff that goes on in the back half. Always wait around, when we're doing the news roll, because in the back half, we're going to be doing something else. Pastor takes control of that. And at the beginning, we're going to be doing the news, and there are some interesting things in the news, some of them that pertain directly to, I think, the future of Christianity.
Perhaps disturbing.
Disturbing, but, I consider some of the things that you did, because a lot of people talk about deliverance. You've heard churches sometimes talk about deliverance.
Yes.
What you were doing, what you still do, I think, is a deliverance ministry. Because you sure did deliver me. If people are for the first time or watching the show because it's on YouTube or any other venue, if it's the first time you've seen it, I'm not a lifelong Lutheran. Pastor Gary is. Pastor Gary, whenever I walked into the church for the first time, instantly recognized the conundrum that I was in, and that was one where I was lost in evangelicalism and needed someone to lead me out of that wilderness, and he did. So.
Yeah, and you were a particular example of something that at the time I really felt was a broader issue. I used to say this more often, that evangelicalism, this would have been more than 15 years ago. So I was of the opinion then, I'll tell you why it's changed, is that evangelicalism broadly, American evangelicalism, we got to kind of make that distinction, was at a crossroads. Unfortunately, it didn't know which way was forward. I think that we're not at a crossroads anymore. I think we took I don't know whether we took a left or a right, but we certainly took a direction that was veering away from true north. I'm saying we as though I'm part of that. I'm an observer. I'm going, I don't think this is a helpful direction to go in. And so it's less about being at the crossroads and more about, can we get anybody rescued kind of out of I don't say we need to have a deliverance ministry for everybody in evangelicalism, but you know what?
How about a lifeboat?
Okay, a life preserver. Throw somebody a line and give them something to hang on to when it isn't working anymore. And that's what a lot of people find, is that they started off one way and they went to church and they listened and they heard what it was being pounded from the pulpit, and it was all great, and they were feeling wonderful until they saw that it was starting to not work so well for them. Right. Of course, at that point, what is their first blush reaction? Oh, they never stop and say, is there something wrong with this environment I'm in? Is there something wrong with the message I'm hearing? What do they start by saying? Well, they start by saying, no, it's got to be me. So then they start going, I wonder what's wrong with me and my faith that I'm having so many troubles now that I didn't have when I first started.
Yeah, they're told to think that way.
I know they are.
It must be you.
It must be you. It sure isn't me. It must be you.
Yeah, right. Well, let's dig into that. So we've got a news roll. So let's just run right into it. Here we go. A recent Pew Research survey. What would Radical Grace Radio be without a survey every week? They surveyed 2,588 Americans found that Americans hold varied views on different religious groups. Jews, Catholics, and mainline or ecumenical Protestants scored positively, while atheists and Muslims were viewed negatively overall. Latter-day Saints, Mormons, were at the bottom of the list. The study suggests that Americans' views of other faiths may be influenced by whether they personally know people of other faiths. Personal familiarity with a religious group tends to increase favorability. The survey also found political partisanship may explain why evangelicals are viewed so negatively, because they scored low on the list as well. And the study had a margin of error of plus or minus 1.5%. Yeah, that bookends this set. You will see why in a little bit.
Okay, so the number 4 story is that Mid Vermont Christian School, we'll call that MVCS, has been banned from future sports tournaments by the Vermont Principals Association after the school withdrew its girls basketball team from a playoff game. And the reason they withdrew is it was due to a transgender athlete on the opposing team. Now, the athlete in question is born a male competing on a female team. And the head of the school, the Christian school, Vicky Fogg, stated that allowing biological males to compete in women's sports jeopardizes fairness and safety. However, the VPA supports transgender student athletes as part of an effort at building an inclusive community. And furthermore, Vermont law, okay, it's not just a school policy. Vermont law allows biological males to compete on female sports teams. In response, MVCS sent a letter to the state's Agency of Education requesting permission to receive public funding while not following all Vermont's anti-discrimination statutes. The VPA, this is the Principals Association, sent a letter to MVCS stating the Christian school is out of compliance with its policies on race, gender, and disability awareness.
Yeah, word of warning, don't be a Christian school in Vermont.
Well, I mean,
basically what it comes down to. Now, in the midst of all of this, and that's the reason why it's the number 3 story, I was actually kind of thinking about this. Here's a story I'm sure that everybody's heard. Inflation in the U.S. remains high at about 6% year on year, primarily driven by increasing housing costs despite falling energy prices. But the situation has been further complicated by 2 large bank failures over the weekend, which experts believe got caught up in the Federal Reserve's attempt to reel in inflation.
Freudian slip.
Right. using interest rate hikes. However, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has indicated the bank collapses and economic news may have slowed the rate hike plan for now. Really? Meanwhile, Moody's downgraded its outlook to negative for U.S. banking system, potentially affecting credit ratings and borrowing costs. The collapse of SVB, one of the banks, has come under scrutiny as it was revealed that CEO Greg Becker and CFO Daniel Beck sold millions of dollars worth of stock just 2 weeks before the bank's collapse. Now, here's the thing that I discovered. The trades were made under a legal corporate trading plan established by the SEC to prevent insider trading, but it's unclear whether the executives knew the company would collapse in just 2 weeks. So if you've been sitting there fuming about, oh, those people, they came out ahead of everyone else, it's like, well, it turns out that was put in place by the SEC to sell all of that. So some computer program someplace that triggered it kind of knew. There was an AI that knew.
Okay. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Number 2 story. A federal judge in the United States is currently hearing a lawsuit that could potentially result in the withdrawal of chemical abortion pills from the market. The lawsuit, which originated in Texas, argues the first drug used to induce abortion, mifepristone, is not as safe as advertised and should not have been approved by the FDA in 2000. The FDA recently expanded access to these drugs, allowing women to receive them via telehealth appointments and through the mail. Chemical procedures currently account for over 50% of all abortions in the U.S. A number of medical organizations have questioned the safety of the at-home pill regimen for over 2 decades. They've been questioning it, and a number of doctors disagree with the FDA's decision to expand access to these drugs. According to Dr. Ingrid Skop, 1 in 20 women who undergo chemical abortions experiences complications. Additionally, Walgreens, the drugstore chain, announced it will not sell abortion pills in several states with abortion restrictions, following them receiving a warning letter from Republican attorneys general in 20 states. So,
and while all that's going on, There
Wait,
was a
there's
new
more?
movie. Yeah, there was a new movie came out last week.
Okay.
Yeah, the release of this new film. It's called Come Out in Jesus' Name. And it's caused a stir on social media after audiences experienced mass deliverances in theaters across the United States. The film follows Pastor Greg Locke and other well-known deliverance ministers as they model Jesus' ministry of deliverance. At the end of the film, Locke held a live mass deliverance altar call that was streamed out to all of those theaters. And, nearly 2,000 theaters, by the way. Following the film's release, Locke and his team received tens of thousands of testimonies from people all over the nation about how they received deliverance. The film came in at number 4 at the box office on that day, because they track these things on a daily basis now. It came out for just one night in theaters, and now has 2 new encore showings on April 10th and April 11th in an additional 500 theaters around the country. The release of the film has sparked a movement, they say, with many pastors being challenged to go deeper into deliverance ministries. And that's the Christian News Roll. Now, for clarity, Box Office Mojo reports that the movie earned, in that one night, $973,795, nearly $1 million from one showing and 2,000 screens.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's refresh the audience's memory about who Greg Locke is. Okay. He's a pastor, but this is the guy. Remember, we were reporting on this several weeks ago, and he basically looked out on his congregation and announced that, well, you know what? We've got witches in this congregation. Mm-hmm. And, he was in a sense kind of threatening the witches, or at least the people he was calling witches, and telling them that, that he had an eye on them. He was, he had their number basically. I don't know whether
you.
Yeah, that's how he put it. I'm watching you. And okay. So, what do you do with that? He's going to go claim that, somebody who thinks differently than he thinks has become, I guess, converted. It's kind of like, Sith Lords. You get converted to the dark side. I don't know. So this is the same guy. This is the same guy.
Kind of important. You just said thinks the way he thinks.
Well, that's ultimately what it is.
Yeah. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, because I got too busy talking about myself, because I was thinking about Deliverance Ministries, that this is a show that teaches you to think with the mind of Christ.
Yeah,
That's what we've been talking about. Not like Greg Locke's mind.
We're gonna look. I'm not gonna show you how to do it. I'm gonna show you how we do it.
Right.
Okay. There's a difference. Okay.
Right.
I remember being very young and having somebody, make that distinction. That there's a difference between somebody saying, I'm going to show you how to, and rather somebody saying, I'm going to show you how I do this. Okay.
Yeah, there's no formula for it. Yeah.
So, think with the whole idea is we have the mind of Christ. That's what Paul says. Well, what do you do with a mind? You think with it. And so, well, what do you think? Well, you think thoughts. There's all kinds of ways that your thinking is expanded, but not in Greg Locke's church. No, it's going to be like concentrated and condensed. You got to get right on the same page with him, or you get called out for who knows what. I mean, this week it's witches. For next week, it'll be something else. I don't know what it is, but I am also concerned about, well, I'm less concerned about the idea that people went to this movie and they were encouraged by their pastors, and their churches. Hey, let's all go see the movie together. Okay, so they went, and there was this a mass deliverance. I'm tempted to call this mass hysteria, or whatever it exactly is that winds up affecting these people deeply. And you told me to go look at the link about what some of these things are looking like in the aftermath.
The movie, yeah.
The trailer for the movie it is shocking. I think that's fair.
The only thing
And
that didn't happen was someone wasn't throwing the Holy Spirit around with their coat.
okay, that's Benny Hinn, but the idea that these folks, as you correctly pointed out, well, I was asking, why are they on the ground? Why are they screaming? And well, you said that's because they know that that's what's supposed to happen, right? The gospel accounts say that the demons when they're coming out thrash the people and they shriek,
Right.
basically. And so if you know that that's what's expected, well, that's what you do then.
Right.
I mean, you, you want to participate, you got to play the game. So I say, okay, so the people who came, most of the people who came, I think that they were not well served by the film. I haven't seen it, so and I'm not going to go see it. But somebody will say, well, then you shouldn't open your mouth and talk about it. Okay, but if it's confusing believers about where they stand with their relationship with Christ, and maybe I'm not the Christian I think I am. Maybe I've really got a demon. My pastor seems to think I do, or Greg Locke thinks I do. So it's but for all that, even though it's fraught with peril, like you could cause some real trauma from that. What's a little worse, in my opinion, as far as measuring the effects, is the pastors that see that they got this reaction from taking their congregations to the movie, and then they start thinking, well, I could be as big a shot as Greg Locke. I could parlay this into my own deliverance ministry, and we can start doing this, on a weekly basis. One pastor can mess up a whole lot more people
Right.
than just a confused layperson who is still capable of doing damage, but not like somebody who has the pulpit and the tools of disseminating, some potentially dangerous ideas. Whatever you say about the Roman Catholic Church, and I usually don't come out and say very complimentary things, but they do take seriously the idea of exorcisms, which technically that's what this movie is trying to do. But they treat that like, okay, first what you do is you make certain that this person has been checked out by a psychiatrist, so that we're not trying to use the wrong tool. If they have a mental or emotional problem, which spiritual deliverance ministry type stuff, exorcism, isn't designed to solve that, then what you need to do is you need to get them the help they really need. There's no concern about the individuals in this case. And I think you pointed out quite correctly before we started recording, the biggest consideration in their minds is that, well, this is a good way to grow, the church, to try to grow my
Right.
following, my personal following.
Right. April 10th. I could go. I'm not gonna, but I could go see it at AMC Classic in West Melbourne
Well, what do you know?
at 7 p.m.
Thank you for, boy, I just wish you hadn't advertised that, but there you go. So, okay. So it's available. I mean, anybody, what am I
It wasn't
saying?
hard to find. I'm not advertising it.
Anybody can Google it if they
Right.
really want to. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to do damage, says me. So,
Well, says me as well, because the thing about it is, I mean, there was a reason why I talked about me at the beginning of the shows, because once upon a time, I would have fallen for this.
now that's what we were
And
saying at the very beginning, that properly understood, the way we're approaching in our Lutheran understanding of these things, it is a kind of deliverance ministry.
right.
I mean, you don't realize how much baggage you're carrying around. You say, well, we're not talking about just some religious baggage. We're talking about real demons. Okay, well, but the kind of baggage that is weighing you down and hurting your spirit and sucking the joy out of life. Maybe it's not a living entity as you're talking about a demon being, but it's still something that, it's a real problem. And if you can deliver people from that, that's doing something. That's the power of Jesus at work. That's not even something we're taking credit for. We're just kind of using what the platform we have, in this case, this podcast and video podcast, to do what Jesus is doing all over the world all the time. Lots of ways that he's delivering people.
Lots of, yes. And the thing is like, I'm concerned. I put in the show notes here because I was experimenting, like, I said, are we witnessing a revival? Well, there's been a lot of talk about revival, and the articles that I read about this, this, all brought up the revivals and the stories that have come up over the last month or so. So a lot of people are giving this some credence. They're saying that, well, it looks like, God is moving in the world. And it's not to say that God's not moving in the world, but is this the movement that everyone thinks that it is? Because I think that it's just the emergence of another Christian-esque kind of thing. It happens over and over and over again.
Right. Okay, just for a second. Remember the Asbury story?
Right.
It was a week or two ago.
Talking about.
Okay, so there are people that they travel great distances because they want to be part of that particular revival experience.
Right.
Okay, and then you have this going on, and it seems to me that it is displaying, well, I don't know, kind of I don't want to sound like I'm saying, oh, there's a real hunger for this in the United States these days, although that's exactly how it get characterized other ways. There's in some ways, it's more like people want to have a thrill, and frankly, just hearing about Jesus and the gifts of God and the sacraments of God, for some people that's gotten boring. It's not the thrill ride that sure feels like, you're strapping yourself in, ride the rocket ride of revival or deliverance or anything that makes you feel like you're, I'm being pulled into this cosmic battle thing, Yeah.
You got called in to the great battle of Armageddon, whatever that one, another one.
Okay.
Many of thousands of Armageddons that have happened.
All right. See, I'm gonna coin a phrase. You tell me if you think this fits, whether we can get mileage out of this. Video game Christianity. I'm streaming my Christian life, not like literally streaming it to everybody to see, but and people are wow, what a great shot. Oh wow, look, he dodged that one, and I'm making my way, and then I get to a certain point and I level up. Right. And I take on one boss and I finally beat that level. And then I get to the big boss at the end and just like, I'm going to name it and claim it, in Jesus' name, you're going down.
Okay. Just so that there is a video game called I Am Jesus Christ.
Oh, no.
Okay. Now, what it is you play as Jesus Christ and you do all the things, right? And I think thing is like, I've never played it. I've never wanted to play it, but for fun, a few players on Twitch have streamed playing it. So,
okay.
When you said that,
I am unaware. Yeah.
But here's let me just take a run at the same idea. It's RPG Christianity, role playing.
Okay, that may be a bit closer. Yeah.
My role at the beginning, whenever they're getting ready to roll the die to see if like I get delivered, it's like, so my role is that I'm the demon possessed something, and so I have to roll a natural 20 to get delivered. Boom, there it is, natural 20. Got it.
Okay. I
So
think
now I'm confirmed.
too many people don't know what we're talking about. So let's move on. I mean, it is. We
You'd be
went down a rabbit
surprised how many
hole. It
people
went down a
know.
rabbit hole. Okay.
You'd be surprised how many people know these things. Okay,
Okay.
well, we used up most of the front half doing this. I don't know what to talk about real quick before we go on to the other side of the break. But I don't want to talk about here's what I could do, I guess.
What?
Well, I could find the thing for on Chat GPT where I fixed up the story for the Texas story.
Oh, okay.
Remember, I was talking about doing that, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. And we've only got a few moments here, but I thought that it was so funny because I asked Chat GPT because I just was like playing around with the notes that I had and stuff like that. Can you write? can you write?
This is the story we read earlier.
Right for the Texas thing. Can you write the write me some news copy based on these bullet points that I'm going to put in the style of the old King James Bible? And this is what I got. And lo, a matter of great import hath come before the court of a federal judge. For there is a lawsuit that seeketh to compel the Food and Drug Administration to withdraw from the market certain pills used for the purpose of chemical abortion. And the judge, who hath been appointed by President Trump, did keep the hearing from the public docket, lest it provoke unrest and protests. And he did also enjoin the attorneys to refrain from discussing the matter in public. And I think I'll stop there because there's several more paragraphs.
There was several more paragraphs, but when you get to the one, I remember we got to this one part. The one thing I said is that's like, and that's where the AI should have added in one more and lo, right? And lo, it came to pass that.
And no, I'm not making fun of the old King James Bible.
No,
that's not the point. It's just that there are people hanging on to these stories like this with the same kind of fervor that they would have used to if someone were like reading the actual scripture. And they're just wound around the pole about, what's happening in Texas or anywhere for that matter.
I think the real story is that the AI is getting not just faster and better, but exponentially faster and better.
Yeah.
Which is kind of mind blowing, but okay.
Yeah.
So because you could have asked it to do the same thing instead of let's go considerably older than King James English. Let's say you wanted to write it in Chaucerian Middle English. It would have done that. You could have even have asked it to do it in Old English, and neither I nor you nor our listeners, for the most part, would be able to read Old English. It has characters in the alphabet that don't exist in our alphabet today. We wouldn't know what to do when we saw those.
Right.
So, I only know because I had to, for a class once, try to decipher something in Old English. but this AI just spits it out. It's just like, oh yeah, if you want to say it in Old English, it'd sound like this. Just like, well, okay.
Yeah. So are we going to need an AI to get through anything on the other side of the break?
Well, it might help, but no, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Well, what we're going to talk about is what's coming up in our gospel lesson for this fourth Sunday in Lent. It's a very, very well-known story about Jesus healing the man born blind. We're not going to rock the boat with like, oh, you never saw this before, but we are going to like carefully read and maybe bring out some points that were there, but and you kind of knew about them, but we're going to bring them to the forefront so that like now they're staring you in the face and you go, oh yeah, oh look at, John's narrative is really a work of art as far as
there's a lot
it's crafted. It is crafted.
There's a lot in that story that's very good. So stick with us and we'll be back with more Radical Grace Radio in just a moment. welcome back to Radical Grace Radio. You know, regardless of what goes on in the world, once in a while, it's good to hear a story, which is interesting because of all the times that goes on in the New Testament, and especially in John, Jesus comes along and instigates a thing, and then suddenly Jesus isn't part of the story for quite a while. Yeah. I really like that it goes off on this, I guess, side quest almost, you know, for this man, because, you know, that's kind of how we feel on a daily basis. You know, Jesus was there, but now we don't see him, but we kind of do see him. Isn't that interesting?
Right. There's still the effects of being in contact with him. And as we're going to see, this is going to raise for a lot of people in the story, but I suppose you could generalize and say also in our congregations, in our listening audience, it winds up raising questions. And well, then Jesus, in the course of this gospel narrative, you know, there's some evidence of answers presented for the questions that arise. So anyway, so we're gonna. In fact, if I was, if this was the sermon and I was preaching on this, I would probably title this, because right now I'm thinking about questions and answers. It's just like there's way more questions and answers in this chapter 9 of John. That then, you know, you start counting them, you start realizing, yeah, there's a lot of people asking questions, and you know, a lot of people who don't know anything, and then what you also see is progressively, at least the man born blind becomes more and more informed, or informed might be the wrong word, enlightened. That's it. Yeah, literally enlightened, but okay. So but it's a longer reading. In fact, in terms of the gospel readings for the last several Sundays, it is by far longer than the others. But why don't you begin by reading chapter 9, and we're going to just take little sections. So if you could start with reading verses 1 through 7.
1 through 7? Okay.
Right.
As he went along, he saw a blind man. That would be Jesus. He saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. And that word means sent. So the man went and washed and went home seeing. And his neighbors... Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, I want you to stop there, because so Jesus does this miracle for the man in that he made the mud, he anointed his eyes, he tells him to wash, and now he can see, right? He's born blind, so he's never seen anything before. This is all completely a new experience for him. And we're going to, for the moment, pass over the question that the disciples have, because it's sort of a question about, you know, well, if the bad things that happen to people in this world, or the things that are seem like they would be punishments, you know, how could he be born and already need to be punished? That doesn't seem like it makes sense. So maybe it goes back farther upstream, and they're asking, maybe it's his parents that are really at fault. And of course, Jesus doesn't go down that at all. He says, we're looking at something entirely different here, guys, entirely different. I just want to point out that as he passed by, so it doesn't really say where he was going. He's going on his way, but we do kind of know, because he tells him, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Well, so that is a place that's in Jerusalem. So we're in the vicinity of Jerusalem, and that makes sense, because in chapter 7, let's just assume that this narrative starts in 7, in the sense that Jesus goes to Jerusalem from Galilee to go to the Feast of of Booths, or Feast of Tabernacles, if you will. And so he's going to go to the temple, and in fact, at one point he's teaching in the temple, and people are kind of wondering, wow, this guy, they're really listening to what his message is. And then you get to chapter 8, and that's interesting because that's also in the vicinity of Jerusalem. I think maybe it's more on the Mount of Olives, but it's which is right by Jerusalem. So it's all kind of their local, still same site, and that's where Jesus. Interesting that he, in chapter 8, gives what you might call "I am the light of the world" discourse, right? And so he says, "I am the light of the world." He says it again in this chapter. You read it in verse 5. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So it's a repeat of what he just said in chapter 8. So that's very important. He is the light of the world. He's enlightening people. He's bringing light into the darkness. And now he's going to do it in a very literal way in the case of this particular man's life. So he makes the saliva, mixes it with the mud, the dirt, and to make the mud, and applies that. And then he tells him, okay, now you go wash. And of course, that's when the miracle occurs. So, and it kind of reminds some people, I think it sort of reminds me even of when the prophet Elisha and the Syrian general Naaman, and Naaman's wanting to be cured of leprosy, and basically Elisha sends a message to tell him how many times he needs to go wash in the Jordan River, and his skin will be made as clean as a baby's skin. So it's the idea that there is a, yes, he could just come out, and we know Jesus can heal immediately from other things in the text, but here's one of the cases. It's not the only case in the gospel accounts, but here's one of the cases where he used something. In this case, he's using some mud. And there's a reason why he's going to do that. His reason why he wants it to have something where the guy has to go, and by the time he can see, well, Jesus isn't following him to the pool of Siloam. So now let's pick up the story, because now you're going to get, I don't want to go too fast, because actually we want to just read a little section. How about 8 through 12? That'd be good.
Okay, so you want me to pick up? Is that what it is?
Yeah, pick up.
Okay. So his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. And he replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes, and he told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said.
All right, let's just stop there. Do you realize there's already 3 questions that are being asked of this man? 3 right away. Well, some of them, one of them may not be directed at him, but it winds up being something that he weighs in on. That the first question is, isn't this the guy? Isn't this the guy we remember? The guy who was always begging because he was born blind, and there's some dispute about that, but he's saying, "You guys, I am the man." So here's something he has an answer for. They want to know who he is. Yes, I'm the same guy, and he can testify to that. He can testify to who he is. And well, now they want to know, how were your eyes opened? Well, he doesn't going to go into metaphysically, what happened. He can just say,
he doesn't know anything about the science about it either.
No, he doesn't. All he can say is, well, okay, the man called Jesus. See, he doesn't know who Jesus is, other than he knows what his name is. So maybe he knows something about his reputation, but that's it. So he doesn't know any more than to say this man who was named Jesus. What did he do? He made mud and he put that on my eyes, and then he told me to go to the pool and wash. And so then I did that. I went and washed and received my sight. So then the next question is, where is he? How do we find him? That's basically the real question here is how do we find him? And finding Jesus is something that we all need to do, want to do, but right now at this point, this man can't give that kind of testimony because he simply doesn't know. I mean, until a few minutes ago, he was just blind.
Yeah, so Jesus put the mud on his eyes and said, "Now go wash,"
and sent him, right?
Yeah, and he was gone, so he never even saw him.
Right. So he wouldn't know him on sight, that's for sure. But they okay. So that's the next question about where is he? I don't know. He can't tell them how to find Jesus, apparently. So now we get to the next little section. Now, these were the neighbors so far, the folks that kind of were in his neighborhood. And, well, they're going to take him to the synagogue because they want the synagogue leaders to at least know what's happened. And maybe they can explain what they think this means. So would you pick up it now at verse 13 and go to the end of 17?
Okay. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "Who put mud? He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not of God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. The rest of 17?
Yeah, just go ahead.
Oh, okay. Then they turned again to the blind man and said, "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he's opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet."
All right, so let's kind of take this apart now, nice and slow and carefully. So they bring him into the folks that are running the synagogue. In this case, it's the Pharisees. And now you learn the detail that you didn't have right at the beginning of the story, that when Jesus made the mud, put the spit into the dirt and kind of mixed it together until it was a pasty mud and put it on the guy's eyes. The day he did this on was the Sabbath day. Okay. Yeah. Well, what are you not supposed to do on the Sabbath?
Work.
Right. And as far as the Pharisees are concerned, when you take spittle,
he might as well be making a clay jar.
Well, you're making something, you're creating mud, you're doing work, you're doing something that's not allowed on the Sabbath. So they react to that. So anyway, so the Pharisees, they asked him, okay? So now here's another question. How he received his sight. So they want to know, tell us what happened, and he simply recounts to them what he told them before. What he told them back in the neighborhood. I put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. I think about, of course, the famous line in the song "Amazing Grace." Right? I once was blind, but now I see. This is his story exactly. And so then the Pharisees weigh in with their opinion that, he did this on the Sabbath day, so clearly this man is not of God. He's not keeping the Sabbath. Here's what they really mean by that. He's not keeping the Sabbath the way we tell people they have to keep the Sabbath. There's a difference, right? That's a difference. But anyway, there's a question, there's a dispute about, if he's a sinner, if God's not on his side, how is he doing these miraculous signs? That's a fair question. There's another question. How can a sinner do such signs? Right. So it's another question that is in the air at this point. It's a question about the nature of Jesus. Like, how is he doing this, and who is he really, and well, where does he stand with God? And well, if we knew that he was speaking for God and doing the things of works of God, that would kind of imply we should be on his side. We should be supporting him. Well, the Pharisees have already ruled that out. So they're not, it's a question that's being raised, but they like the easy answers that he doesn't observe the Sabbath the way we say to observe it. So he must not be any good. And that leads to division. So even among the people who are running the synagogue, now there's a division. And so they're going to go back to the blind man. Well, what do you say about him? Right now, they're asking him to weigh in more than just what he knew before about, the guy who healed me is a man called Jesus. It's like, okay, yeah, but tell me what you say about him. And now the blind man, he needs to form an opinion. He's still, the guy is still not super knowledgeable at this point. I mean, it's like the beginning of enlightenment. You don't have all the answers at once, but you have enough to know how to go forward, right? And so he's thinking about it. He says, well, he's a prophet. That's the conclusion. That's the best he can come up with right now, is that it makes sense to him that this man would be a prophet. So that's not going to sit well with the folks that are interviewing him or interrogating him or whatever you want to call it. So why don't you go ahead and pick up at verse 18 and go through the end of 23. That'd be a good block.
Okay. So they still did not believe that he had been born blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this
That's
the
a question.
one?" Yeah.
That's a question.
"Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that he now can see?"
There's another question.
"You know he is our son," the parents answered. "And we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him. He's of age. He will
Okay.
speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That is why his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him."
That's right. So they're being asked these direct questions, but it comes with a price, that they would, and frankly, the parents are not in a position to know so much, right? They weren't there when it happened. They do know, they testify to what they know absolutely is true. It's our son. Definitely know that. And we know that he was born blind. So now they've been asked those two questions, asked and answered. And as far as how he now sees, well, then that's the same question that everybody's asking, and they don't know. They don't know how Jesus could have performed this sign. I was going to say this miracle, but in John, miracles are always referred to as signs. So it's a miraculous sign, but it's a sign, and it's supposed. Here's a good thing to remember: signs point to something, and in this case, what are they pointing to? Well, they're pointing to the statement back in chapter 8 and also repeated in chapter 9, "I am the light of the world," right? In chapter 8, he says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness." So clearly, you're not going to be blind any longer if you're following Jesus, because then you would be walking in darkness. That's what these signs are pointing to. It's very important. And so they've, and the Jews have already decided, well, if you line up on that side, you don't even need to show up anymore in this synagogue. You're not welcome here. So, okay. So they basically try to get out of answering that, and successfully, because although the guy is a mature adult, he can answer for himself. Okay. So now you get to verse 24, and they're gonna turn their attention back to this guy, and well, they're going to ask him another question. So go ahead at verse 24 and
Okay.
and how about reading to the end of verse 34?
Okay. A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I've told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciple too? Then they hurled insults at him and they said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out.
All right, thank you. So again, the drama unfolds, and now they're grilling him, and I when they ask him how what did he do? What did he do exactly? How did he open your eyes? I'm not sure that they want to hear again the simple sequence of events. First, he took the spit, then he made the mud, then he put it on my eyes, and he told me to go wash. I think what they want to know is, did he do anything else? How do you account for the power that now has caused your eyes to be functioning? They really want to know something the guy isn't going to be able to answer, because Matthew, can you explain a miracle, how it works?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
So, well, I can't either.
Mud, spit, eyes, wash. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. By a means I do not understand, these things were effective because he told me. There's the real answer. The real answer is, what makes these things effective? Because Jesus told me that this was going to happen. And his word, man, that's all you need right there. The word does everything. So anyway, he's been grilled so far, and he, I suppose, innocently asked, this time it's a question to them, do you also want to become his disciple? Are you asking me all this because you want to sign up? And and this gets them riled up. This gets them, angry and hissing at him like a mad cat. Well, you are his disciple. We're disciples of Moses, right? We're the Pharisees. We don't mess around with sideshows. We only go to Moses. And we know God has spoken to Moses, but we don't even know where this guy comes from. And so, well, anyway, and that's where the guy's saying, here's something really remarkable. This man is doing something nobody's ever even heard of before. And what? You guys are the last to know about it? You're like not informed? So, then he weighs in again with his idea. If he were not from God, well, then he wouldn't be able to do anything. I mean, consider this, is that, could any of those Pharisees just spit on some dirt and put it on eyes and voila, when you wash, you can see? No. Well, this man can, right? Or at least he did. And then they say, we don't need to take this. And then they basically say something about him being born in utter sin, like you're a lost cause. You are somebody that we won't associate with further. And how dare you try to lecture us on what God is about or what God wants. And so they throw him out. Okay, so now the guy's out on his ear, and well, what now we get to the kind of the I guess the close of the story. But up to this point, notice what's happened. First, the guy was only just saying what he knew about himself. I am the man. Don't worry about whether I am or not. I'm telling you, I'm the guy. And then he could say, well, I can tell you that the man called Jesus did these things, and then I can say that what the result was. And now, pushing that a little farther, he comes to the conclusion, well, if you pin me down on this, I guess he's a prophet. And well, now the next question and answer keeps going, and now the guy's making really what is a very enlightened, choose that word carefully, confession, about Jesus being a man from God. Because if he wasn't a man from God, he couldn't do these things. Okay, so now we're getting ready to come to the end. He's just been cast out. And would you read from 35 to the end of this chapter?
Sure. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?"
Now, there's another question. Notice, I said there's a lot of questions and answers in here.
"Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." And then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked him, "What, are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
All right.
I love that.
So, yeah. Now, when some of the Pharisees with him or near him, when they ask the question, they're asking a question: are we also blind? I think the implication is they weren't there. They weren't part of the interrogation party. Maybe they came from the synagogue, but maybe these are the guys on the fence that, I don't know, they're gonna go stay with this man who got cast out, not because they're choosing to take sides with him, but they wonder, well, if Jesus has said that this is about judgment coming into the world, and that those who think that they can see, are going to become blind. Well, are we also? Are you including us? Are we blind? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, meaning physically blind, if you were, you'd have no guilt. Or maybe he's saying, if you simply acknowledged your spiritual blindness, you would have no guilt. That's probably closer. But now look what instead you're doing. You're saying, well, we see, we comprehend what's really going on here. And, well, you see, and his answer is, your guilt remains. Your own words show that you haven't learned anything. So it's all about the questions and answers, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I really love that bit at the end of that chapter where he calls them out, like, because they asked the question. Now talk about a question.
Yeah.
If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin.
Yeah.
But now that you claim that you can see, your guilt remains.
And I do want to say, and there was one question there that does get asked of all of us. Do you believe in the Son of Man? That's a fair question that we all ultimately, our answer is going to be our answer. What say you?
To believe in the light of the world. Yeah. A light that, by the way, is so bright that it can make people see. Thanks for listening to Radical Grace Radio today, and may God bless you.